Good afternoon and welcome to this earthday.org interview. My name is Shelley Rogers and I'm the coordinator of Fashion for the Earth at Earth Day. We are so pleased today to be interviewing Alden Wicker, who is the author of this fascinating book, To Die For. And the subtitle is How Toxic Fashion is Making Us Sick and How We Can Fight Back. When we say the closest thing to me is blank, fill in the blank, we're probably going to get that wrong because the closest thing to all of us is our clothing. Our species is not blessed with a lot of protective covering against the natural elements like a tough hide or scales. And so our clothes protect us. But what if they're not protecting us? And even worse, what if they are dangerous? I simply cannot recommend this book highly enough. I am somebody who reads fiction and history, not science as a rule, but this book is great storytelling. And this book is absolutely, I would say, jaw-dropping history at times. And even with the wide scope of information in this book, because of the comprehensiveness of the subject matter, it does not make for dense reading at all. In fact, I'm a slow reader and I just sped through it. A lot of people have said that. It sweeps along at a fast pace, and I think it's because of the clarity in the writing. But accolades aside, it's the importance of this subject that is the thing. The fact that the chemicals in our clothing are not something that we know about, but that we need to know about. And I think two things will not be lost on anyone who reads this book. That one, industry that in our minds makes us look good, helps express our creativity, gets our authentic identity across, is continually, but also stealthily contributing to the erosion of the natural world, which happens to include us. And two, the laxity of regulations in this country, which is profoundly scary. And hopefully, at least this is my opinion, it will contribute in a measure to a cultural shift away from the overproduction, overconsumption of an industry that is today almost entirely unregulated and will only change with regulations, including regulations around harmful chemicals in our clothing, which have been so well explained in this book. As Alden says, fashion is chemistry and chemistry is fashion. Alden Wicker is an award-winning journalist. She is a sustainability fashion expert and founder and editor-in-chief of EcoCult.org. She's published investigative pieces for the New York Times, Vogue, and Wired, and has been interviewed for the BBC, NPR, Reuters, Fortune, CBC, and others. In 2021, Alden won the American Society of Journalists and Authors Award for Business Reporting. And now, without further ado, welcome to you, Alden. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Shelley.
You're welcome. I want to ask this first question is, you are considered an expert in sustainability and fashion, and you're sought out all the time for this acumen that you have. When you decided to write a book, there were so many topics. You had like a cornucopia. You had like a smorgasbord, a myriad topics that you could have chosen about fashion and how it impacts the environment. And you were offered actually an opportunity to write a book about how to shop sustainably, which you turned down. I want to know, why did you turn that down in the first place? And then how did you come upon this topic? And what compelled you to tackle what I think of as a pretty difficult subject?
You're right. It was pretty ambitious or crazy to write an entire book about chemistry when I am not a chemist. But, yes, I was offered a couple times the opportunity to write the How to Shop Sustainably book. And first of all, it's been done really well. You know of Elizabeth Klein, who wrote The Conscious Closet. And there was the other thing that was bothering me about, I had been writing for almost a decade about fashion sustainability. And when I first got into this, I thought, okay, well, we'll just educate people on how to make better choices, and they will. And that was proving not to be true, not because of some cynical reason that I think people don't care. It's that trying to keep in mind people that you've never met, a river that you've never seen, an invisible gas going into the atmosphere when you just need when you just want to buy something that can help you go hiking or that you can wear to a wedding, it's really hard to keep those things in mind and even know how much more should I pay for them? Can I trust this company? All of these different things. And it takes somewhat of an expertise and resources to make those decisions. And so uh, I first came across this topic when I was contacted by a radio show who said that Delta Airlines attendants were suing Land's End, who made their uniforms, because they said their uniforms were making them sick. And I had never heard about fashion making anybody sick before, but when I looked into it, I found that this was one out of four major airlines that had had this problem after they introduced new synthetic, high performance, brightly dyed uniforms. And these attendants were made very, very sick. Some of them became disabled when they would get on the plane with their colleagues wearing the uniforms, racing heart, brain fog, blurry vision, crusty eyes, rashes so bad that they bled, coughing fits. Some of them were taken off the plane and taken to the ER. And this led me down a road of several years of research where I wanted to find out, okay, how was this happening to the flight attendants? What was in these uniforms to make this happen, and why? How did these hazardous chemicals get on there? Whose fault was it? And then B, if this is happening in a really obvious and clear way to airline employees, is this some version of this happening to the rest of the population, normal people with normal fashion? And the answers that I found were really shocking. But the main thing I drew out of it was, yes, normal people wearing normal fashion that you can buy at your mall or online is making people sick in sometimes subtle and sometimes more obvious ways.
I see. I see. Excuse me. You know, it was quite remarkable, wasn't it? That I would say, just roughly, it's not the right exact number of years, but sort of the 2000 teens, that four airlines, not one, not two, not three, four airlines rolled out these new uniforms. It was Alaska, Southwest, Delta, and American. And obviously they were designed for a reason. They thought these would be good. But you know, if you can divorce yourself from the human, what happened to set aside your empathy, your compassion from the disaster that it was for so many flight attendants, and just look at it coldly, it was really quite favorable, quite propitious in a way, for a brilliant science experiment. Can you explain why that was? Why this particular cohort of people, this particular job, and this particular situation? I would say, I think one of the people you interviewed said that they were the canaries in the coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
You might say that these were like petri dishes, flying.
Yeah.
Well, you know.
Yeah, so there's a few reasons why it became really obvious to the flight attendants. And I'll say that, like, some of the flight attendants, it would take them a year to figure out what was going on because they were being told what they were experiencing wasn't real. But they would get their uniforms on this and start wearing them the same day. And then they can wear these uniforms for a full day, a full 24 hours if they're doing long international flights. They're sleeping in them on the plane. They're all wearing them around each other in this sealed tube of air, and they talk to each other. Flight attendants, they spend the night in crash pads. They go out socially together on their layovers. They're in the back of the galleys just hanging out between service and talking to each other and sharing, like, oh, I have a racing heart. My hair is falling out. Oh, my period is irregular. Oh, I also have a rash. And then also they created a Facebook group where they were able to talk to each other. But what really brought this all together was the industrial hygienist, Judith Anderson at the AFA, the union that represents flight attendants from several major airlines, who started advocating for the flight attendants and got a group of Harvard researchers to do a health survey. They had already done a health survey, happened to do a health survey before the introduction of the uniforms at Alaska Airlines. They did another health survey and showed that definitively after the introduction of uniforms, a variety of these health complaints, acute health complaints, had more or less doubled the reporting of these. And so it was very clear that the uniforms were causing these problems. But these are just short-term problems. Since then, I've been talking to flight attendants, and some of them have developed multiple autoimmune diseases, skin cancer, just like long-term asthma. In one case, the asthma turned out to be deadly to the flight attendant. So the long-term health problems as well.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what was the airline's initial defense? They came out with a couple of statements when these started flying in. What was their defense?
Well, the first time this happened at Alaska Airlines, the Alaska Airlines was asking Twin Hill, who made the uniforms, like, what's going on here? So Twin Hill was saying, oh, there was a contaminated batch. Oh, we're not working with that factory anymore. And then they were saying, well, this is just normal stuff. And then they had things tested. They paid to have things tested, and they would come back. This happened at multiple different uniform makers. They would come back and say, okay, we're not going to share all the results with you, but believe us when we say the experts that we have paid say that nothing in the uniforms is in there at an amount that could cause all of the different symptoms going on in the flight attendant. And they're slicing it really thin there, because basically what they're saying is, we opted what to test for. There are 40 to 60,000 different chemicals used commercially worldwide. Many of them never tested. But so they are deciding what to look for, and then they're testing for it, and they're saying individually all these different things. Most of the things are under these sort of arbitrary limits that the industry has voluntarily come up with. But they're not looking at how they might combine. They're not looking at how they might have synergies or might affect each other, or some of them might work on the same organs or have the same type of toxicity and add up to more. But they're just saying, okay, well, yeah, I guess we found a restricted disperse dye at amounts higher than the standard limit, but we don't think that that could cause all of the different symptoms. So we're going to say that our uniforms are safe.
Wow. So lawsuits were initiated, and two of them failed. One against Twin Hill in the case of Alaska Airlines, and one against Land's End, against which was the company that made Delta's uniforms. Those were in 2016, 2020. But you mentioned in your book, because it went to publication in June, and you mentioned in the book that there is still one outstanding lawsuit that hasn't come through yet, and it just did in October. Can you talk about that? Was again against Twin Hill, that also made not just Alaska's Airlines uniforms, but American. In this case, it was Twin Hill, the American Airlines attendants. And can you talk about what it just happened? I mean, it's like a month and a half.
Yeah, it was actually really exciting. 4 airline attendants from American Airlines sued Twin Hill, and it went before a jury. It was sort of a test case to see what a jury would do, and the jury awarded the 4 of them together over $1 million. Some of them got more than others because they had a variety of severity of their illnesses. But there's probably, because that happened, there's probably going to be probably not more jury trials. There's probably going to be more settlements, because there's 400 more airline attendants from American Airlines who have joined or who are trying to sue Twin Hill to get justice for what these uniforms did to their health.
I guess that's called a bellwether trial, right? Where other people seeing the results of that can go forward with settlements without necessarily, like you just said. But I wondered when I read about it, whether your book came out in June. This was decided in October. I wondered if they'd read your book. That's what
if they didn't, that would be weird, but I'm not sure. I mean, this is a jury trial, so I think if anybody on that jury had read my book, they probably would have been excluded from participating. Right. So I think the case really, maybe the lawyers
to die
for their strategy and their arguments on it. I actually don't know. I should probably get in touch with the lawyers who are involved as part of that. The union wouldn't talk to me for the flight attendants because of ongoing litigation and everything. But yeah, it's very exciting, because I think we do understand why and how this is happening, and the old defense that, like, oh, well, just tell us the one chemical that caused all these problems is just not going to fly for the average person who's looking at what happened.
Right. And so I want to talk about something that you you explain so well in the book. You have your minor allergy, like you put on some suntan lotion and your skin reacts badly, so you get a different one. It's no big deal, but allergies can be deadly. But one thing that comes out, and you're just talking about this now, all the chemicals in these uniforms. There's a quote, I'm going to read it, that you quote Rachel Carson in your book, who says, a human being, unlike a laboratory animal living under rigidly controlled conditions, is never exposed to one chemical alone. Whether released into soil or water or a man's blood, these unrelated chemicals do not remain segregated. They're mysterious and unseen changes by which one alters the power of another for harm. And so that's something you go into a lot in the book. What if I have in my clothing chromium and lead and a phthalate and BPA and cadmium? So what? It's when they interact together. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So even in the uniforms, for example, that were tested, one of the labs that was not paid by Alaska Airlines or Twin Hill came back and said, yeah, both of these two separate things were under the limit, but one could make the other more potent by like allowing it to get through the skin barrier easier. There's a bunch of different hormone disrupting chemicals that they're different, right? You have PFAS, you have BPA, you have phthalates, but they're all interfering with the regulation of your hormonal system or your endocrine system. And when that happens, that has cascade effects across the body. It's not just your ability to have children or the regularity of your period. It's also your skin appearance. It's your immune system function. PFAS has been shown to suppress your immune system function, your brain function, your like the development. If you have kids, their development, healthy development, your energy levels, your weight, like all of these different things are affected by it. And we have these cascading complicated effects, right? So, and so they can combine and one can weaken your body so that another one can have more effects, or they can combine in the environment or like in your washing machine or dryer to create new different carcinogenic chemicals that are even more potent. So there's a lot of things that we don't know. And, just in fashion, you can have 50, 100 different chemicals, dyes, finishes, scouring agents, surfactants, contaminants, pesticides, fungicides, all layered onto one piece of fabric. And then you're wearing 6, 7 different things, your socks, your underwear, your shirts, your jackets, your shoes. And then you're going to get your hair done and your nails done on top of that. And you're inside your home with your off-gassing formaldehyde furniture. And we're expected to treat all of these things as if we're only encountering that one chemical and it's not mixing and being added to this stew around us. And so especially for things like hormone disrupting chemicals that can do so much damage at such tiny, tiny, tiny amounts, that argument that like, oh, we just keep it under a certain amount will be okay, that it doesn't hold any water.
Right. And just there's so many fascinating things in this book. This thing I can't guess probably dwell on it too long. I wish this was a 3-part series. Something called mast cell activation, which you talked to Dr. Claudia Miller, and she's an allergist, and she showed how you gave the example of your own self with poison ivy, and also the example of the strawberry with pesticides, where you can become allergic to something, but whatever is with it at the time, if you come across those other innocent things, if they're attached to that thing you're allergic to, can you talk about the poison ivy example?
Yeah. So we have these things in our body called mast cells. They're very ancient, and they're our protector cells. They are anywhere our body is coming in contact with the outside world. So that's our skin, obviously, but like also our digestive system, right? You have food moving through the digestive system, as well as your lungs, like all of these different places. So if they encounter something that's toxic, they're going to release these things called cytokines, which lead to inflammation. And like inflammation can be good, right? Like there's a purpose for inflammation. But if you're constantly encountering you encounter a huge amount of a toxin, it can kind of cause like a traumatic experience to these cells, where I kind of compare it to a soldier with PTSD, right? Like we all know that, hearing fireworks doesn't mean we're in danger, but they've encountered real danger, and now these soldiers are reacting to fireworks in a way that it could be considered an overreaction. And so, like the rest of us normal people can smell new paints or gasoline or a new piece of fashion that kind of smells bad, or encounter a dye or something, and we're like, oh, that kind of smells bad, or like I have a mild headache. And then people who have been sensitized have this extremely strong reaction, and if they can't remove that trigger from their environment, they're in a constant state of inflammation, and that can lead to autoimmune diseases, which it's very clear that chemical exposure along with viruses can lead to autoimmune diseases, where the immune system is overreacting and attacking your own body. It's gone haywire. And so that chapter, people don't talk about that chapter so much, but I consider that one of the most important chapters, because it's not just about fashion, but fashion is one of those things where people who have mast cell activation syndrome, also some people call it multiple chemical sensitivity. Dr. Claudia Miller calls it toxicant-induced loss of tolerance, or TILT. Those people often can't wear synthetic fibers, bright colors, performance fabrics. They need to swap themselves in pastel and white cottons and silks and hemps and other, lyocell, tencel, these other natural fabrics, or else they get rashes or they can't breathe. And again, like normal people, I say this in quotes, are sort of like, oh, it's fine. Like, what, you don't like my scented Yankee candle? But this body is sending us warnings. Like the rash is usually the first thing that happens, right? Like you get a rash, and that's your body saying like, hey, I really don't like this. Like, I don't want this around. And if you keep exposing yourself to it, it can cause further problems down the road.
Right. That's really well explained in the book. I mean, it's all really well explained. I want to talk about Duke University. Everybody's going to come away from this book with a lot of different things that they think about long term. But one of the things that I take away from this is that there's so many unsung heroes in this world. But I didn't think until I read this book about the unsung heroes in your book, who are pretty much all scientists, and how every day they toil away in their laboratories, sort of pushing the needle, pushing the cart up the hill in their way to try to expose the truth. And this is so beautifully told. A really positive thing in the book is the subject around azo dyes and Duke University. 3 scientists there, Heather Stapleton, Dr. Lee Ferguson, and Dr. Kirsten Overdahl, and how they work together in this amazing way, one passing the baton off to the other, and coming up with these great discoveries that, by the way, were just published, a couple of them last month. But so first of all, what are azo dyes? What are azo-dispersed dyes? Why are they bad? And then why are they being banned in the European Union and not banned here? That's what I.
Yeah. So azo dyes are a specific type of dye, and it's actually the majority of dyes used today are azo dyes, and they're made, like most chemicals used in fashion, from petrochemicals. And we know that some are hazardous. We know that some release these things called amines, which are carcinogenic when they come in contact with your skin. And so there are some that are voluntarily restricted by the fashion industry. So the fashion industry says we're not using them anymore. And then some of them are banned in the European Union. There is a subset, they're not banned in the United States, by the way. They're just voluntarily restricted. So like we just need to believe fashion brands when they say they're not using them, but they sort of keep showing up, unsurprisingly. So, and they're used a lot in developing countries. Like if you buy fashion in Bangladesh, like they're probably going to be in there. So there's a subset of those called azobenzene dispersed dyes. And dispersed dyes, that's DISPERSE. They're called that because you disperse them in water. They're used specifically to dye synthetic fabrics. And if you know that polyester is a plastic, that nylon is a plastic, that acrylic is a plastic, and you think about trying to dye a water bottle or a plastic bag, you understand why you would need special dyes to penetrate and stick to a plastic-based fiber. So pretty much all polyester that you buy today is dyed with dispersed dyes. And dispersed dyes are very commonly known to be skin sensitizers by dermatologists, but that hasn't really gotten into the fashion industry. And so what happened is that Dr. Heather Stapleton, who is at the Duke University Nicholas School of the Environment, is also a mother. And so she bought a athletic shirt for her son. Her son starts complaining when he's wearing it, and she pulls it up, and he's got a rash in the shape of the pattern of the shirt. And so she brings it in and hands it off to her colleague, Dr. Lee Ferguson, so that he can test it with this like world-class testing equipment to see what is in there. And it starts him off on this journey to be like, oh, there's these brominated compounds in here. They're not flame retardants. What are they? Oh, they're the same thing that we're finding in house dust. Like, where are these things coming from? And after 5 years of research, they pulled in Kirsten Overdahl, who was a PhD candidate at the time. She's now graduated. They pulled her in because she had an interest in toxicology. She's also dealt with autoimmune disease in her own life. She's interested in environmental toxicology. Over 5 years, they did a series of studies and experiments where they were looking at, okay, what are these things? Okay, they are dispersed dyes. They're used in polyester. What are they? Have they been tested for safety? No, they haven't. They're not even labeled. Like a lot of people, scientists don't even know that a lot of these exist. There's thousands of them, unlabeled, untested in the literature. Okay, well, let's prove that like these things are coming from our polyester fashion. So they found it in kids' clothing. It's in house dust. And then they were like, are these skin sensitizers or immunosensitizers? And the answer is yes, they are. The 12 that they were able to synthesize down, purify down, and test all showed signs of being immunosensitizers. So when I discovered that and talked to these researchers, something clicked for me because I had been hearing for years from people, from readers of my website, EcoCult, that they can't wear polyester because it makes them itch, it makes them react. And I was asking experts in the industry, I said, well, what's in polyester? Does it have any hazardous materials? And they would, no, polyester's fine. There's no evidence that polyester has anything in it. And when I realized that the dye used on polyester is an or a skin sensitizer, I was like, that's it. The dye is causing people to have these reactions. They're not crazy. Like what they're naming is real, even if experts are saying it's not real. And then beyond that, like we've also found recently that polyester spandex has BPA, which is a hormone disrupting chemical. So right now we're in a space where a lot of this research has just come out in the past 5 to 10 years. And prior to that, the line was, there is no evidence that the fashion is causing problems. And each of these studies, which cost a lot of money and take many years, is chipping away at that, what I believe is a lie, that there are hazardous substances in our clothing and they are causing us health problems.
The azo dyes are called CMR, are they not? They're carcinogenic, mutagenic, and reprotoxic. And so
some are very clearly linked to being carcinogenic. Yes.
Right. And one of the arguments about why we don't need to worry about them is because, well, we don't really come into contact with them, not that much.
We don't eat our clothing
We don't eat our clothing.
is what people
this
say. Yeah.
science experiment showed was that we're breathing them. So if if there's ability for them to cause be CMR when in contact with our skin, how about when it goes through our nasal passages, our throat, and down into our lungs? So this is a real breakthrough, I think, and it was so beautiful the way they worked together. I was just, I want to read I love reading the quotes that you have. Kirsten Overdahl says, "I see every day in our raw data that our instruments produce that there are often thousands of chemicals in a sample that cannot be matched to a known chemical. If we can't match a name to a chemical structure, it means the data is not out there, so you cannot say that it is safe." I went into PubChem. I could see the diagram. I don't know chemistry, but there's a diagram that explains it. She found 5,000 of them exactly like azo dyes. But then usually it has the name over on the right and then the toxicity test. Imagine you get the structure, but nothing else. So these are probably azo dyes. Gosh, there's so many questions. I want to just briefly switch to endocrine disruptors. And we're not going to have time to talk about them individually. You've already talked about them, but they affect our organs. They endocrine disruptors disrupt everything, about our endocrine system, which is scary. How do they get into our system from clothes, and what clothes are they normally found? What most likely or more often found in?
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways in which we can get these endocrine disruptors into our system from clothes. So, like you alluded to, they can come off our clothing into our house dust or onto our skin. We can breathe them in. They can end up in our drinking water because we're washing our clothing. There's just like a bunch of different ways that they can get into our blood. But they're used for a variety of reasons. So PFAS is a class of chemicals that's used for stain and water repellency. So you're going to find it on all of your outdoor gear, your snow boots, your snowboard and ski gear, quick dry bathing suits, professional uniforms, stain-proof kids' school uniforms, all of those different places. And there's been research that shows that like when it's on your clothing, it's coming off into your home where you can breathe it in, where your kids can breathe it in, where your pets pick it up on their paws and lick their paws and get it into their body. So that's one type. There's BPA and other bisphenols. BPA has been found in workout clothing. Very recent research showed that when you sweat in synthetic fabrics containing hazardous substances, the sweat draws those substances out onto your skin. And certain substances we know can go through your skin into your bloodstream. So that's another way. And then you have phthalates, which are plasticizers that are used in plastics, especially in PVC, which is often labeled as like vegan leather, like super cheap vegan leather. And some brands have banned PVC from their offerings. But you can still find children's toys and stuff with PVC, and you can find like clear backpacks, with princesses on them, jelly shoes, vegan leather skirts, pleather leggings, all of those different things.
Yeah. You said that it takes very little of these to actually get into us. And so that scares me when I think about someone who might be pregnant, for example, or babies, that you compared that you said it only takes can you describe the drop of water?
Yeah, it just takes like the equivalent of a drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So like parts per billion and it can cross the placenta. So there's there's lots of scary stuff, but there's something called phthalate syndrome, which is when a fetus is exposed to phthalates, and it can end up with genital abnormalities. And there's other things like your future babies that you haven't even thought about yet could end up with health damage when you are exposed as a man or woman to these endocrine disruptors. So yeah, I know, like, pregnant women, it feels silly to buy something you're only going to wear for a few months, but I cannot stress enough how dangerous it is to buy super cheap, ultra fast fashion, synthetic fashion, stain proof stuff, and wear when you're pregnant, or to put your baby in super cheap fashion.
Right, right. It's really, really scary. So we've talked to somewhat about PFAS, and I don't think we have enough time. I feel bad about not being able to go into it, which you do quite a bit. And there, um, I want to talk about PFAS is something. I thought PFAS was one chemical.
Mm.
It's not one chemical, not by a
It's a
long
class, yeah, it's a class of
shot.
chemicals, some of which have been extensively studied,
Yeah,
and then more than 10,000 others that have not been studied at all.
right. So the scary thing to me is that company knows that something is a PFOA or PFOS, one of the big ones that you hear about, but they can do something called, they can try to get around anyone looking at their clothes and examining them by doing something called a regrettable, what you call a regrettable substitution. What is that? That's where they tweak something, right? But
Yeah, regrettable substitution is something that happens in the world of chemicals and consumer products where um, one one chemical gets really bad press, and so companies voluntarily say, okay, we're no longer going to use that. So you see a lot of like BPA free water
mhm,
bottles, right? But
mhm,
there's also BPS, BPF, BPZ. There's other bisphenols that have been swapped in that are just as bad. They just haven't been studied and haven't gotten as bad
mhm,
press. And the same thing, there's activists that are trying to head this off from happening in PFAS, but it's already sort of happened. So
mhm,
there's long chain PFAS. That means like there's a lot of carbons, 8 carbon atoms in this like chain,
mhm,
and that's PFOS, PFOA. That's the stuff that got the really bad press and like poisoned a West Virginia town and North Carolina and other places. And so a lot of fashion brands, I mean, a lot of fashion brands didn't know. They were being told by, you know, they were being told by like DuPont and 3M, oh, okay, well, we know those are bad. So we're just use short chain PFAS chemicals instead because they're safer. They're not as persistent. And we now know that's not true. So there's a lot of work being done right now to ban PFAS as an entire chemical class. And that's going to be really important because what we're seeing right now is up until recently, certifications such as Okotex or the industry group ZDHC would test or just ban certain types of PFAS. So they say like you can't use these 8 or these 12. But again, there's 12,000 estimated
mhm.
PFAS types in existence, and so factories and chemical companies can just like switch to another one, and they know it's not going to be tested for, and then no one will know.
Right. Scary. And that brings up the subject of legislation. In the United States, we have the Toxic Substances Control Act that was introduced in 1976. And just basically, from your book, I know basically everything that was already in existence was just more or less grandfathered in, like about 64,000 chemicals.
Yeah.
And so then they had the Lautenberg Act in 40 years later, 2016, to try to shore up the Toxic Substances Control Act because it was so weak. But even so, it's still unbelievably weak. Just now in 2023, the Biden administration made an announcement that they're gonna make sure that we set aside 6 PFAS, the 2 big ones, PFOS, POA, and make sure they're not. It's in 45% of our drinking water. It's in almost 99% of all Americans, people, and everywhere. And now we're going to just halt these 6 out of 12,000. In the
Mhm.
meantime, what's going on in Europe? They have something called REACH, which is their version of the Toxic Substances Control Act. But they've just introduced something called the Restrictions Roadmap, which is unbelievable when you read it. I mean, they are going to town. They say that 5 to 7,000 chemicals will be banned by the year 2030.
Yeah.
But what are they going to do about PFAS, which I think is so interesting?
Well, unfortunately, the chemical industry did get involved and they walked back a lot of their promises to regulate PFAS as a class
Mhm.
in Europe. And also, just to be clear, the EPA, so the EPA governs drinking water and, factories that are in the United States, but it doesn't govern clothing that is imported to the United States.
Right.
So there are some chemicals that are very banned for all uses in the United States, sale and use and everything. But there is nothing illegal about putting that chemical on a piece of clothing and selling it to a consumer in the United States. Literally nothing illegal. There's all the limits we have. There is legislation in California that says if you have a hazardous substance, you have to label it, but it's not banning these hazardous substances. It's just saying you have to put a label on it. That's why you see labels on things that say this is known in the state of California to have substances that are reproductive toxic or carcinogenic. So there are protections in Europe. They've banned over 30 chemicals specifically for use in textiles. They could do more. We thought they were going to do more. Just turns out they got scared of the chemical industry. But in the United States, we're really not protected. There are 3 chemicals that are banned, but only for children's products: lead, some phthalates, and cadmium.
That's hard. Just 3 out of all these chemicals that it's scary. I mean, you went to Newark. Can you talk about your trip there? You found out that there, you think, well, maybe the Customs and Border Agency works under the Consumer Product Safety Commission is pulling things out and examining them. I guess we don't have too much time left for better, but I want to ask you about that. When you went out there, what did you find? I mean, they were very nice to you. They liked you.
Yeah, they were really nice. Especially for a government agency. No, they were fab. I really liked all the customs people personally, right? Like they're really trying to do their job with not a lot of resources. But they don't have. I wanted to know, like, do they ever open these big shipping containers or open a box, and say, whoa, that smells bad. Let's get that tested. It turns out they only do that for counterfeit products. So if it's like a legitimate brand, even if it's like Shein, right? And Shein is not counterfeit, it's just super cheap. And if Shein is shipping in like a 1 package of like a kid's raincoat, which by the way was tested in Canada and found to have high levels of lead and phthalates, they're gonna wave that right through. They're not even going to look at all of these little packages because in the United States, any shipment under $800 is not tariffed and it's not checked for safety. So it could be filled with razor blades. And if your 12-year-old daughter orders it off of Amazon or one of these social media ads, nobody is checking it before it gets to your front door. And I've talked to people who say, like, they open a package and it smells like gasoline. That's a really good indication that it's toxic.
Right. I think you said in June of 2021, a pretty strange group of strange bedfellows, a group got together to try to do something about this. It was the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, Earth Justice, Consumer Reports, American Apparel and Footwear Association, and they said that it was an appeal.
And the American Chemistry Council. Don't forget them.
Right. Well, what were they doing in there? They're not everybody's best friend. So it says the petition was, I guess, to the EPA, and it said the agent.
It was to Congress. It was to Congress, and it was asking Congress to give more funding to the Consumer Product Safety Commission because they were saying they're not able to do their jobs.
No.
And it's so crazy that like the American Chemistry Council could agree with like the breast cancer prevention network on this. Like it must be in disarray over there. And like you can go to the CPSC and you can make a little report and you can see all the reports that they've done. And like there has to be thousands of people reporting straight up obvious chemical burns to the CPSC for the CPSC to be like, maybe we should talk to the manufacturer of the brand and see if they might grant us a little recall here. But like they don't have teeth,
Yeah, it's sad. I had so many questions. I'm skipping them all. You did your own testing, Alden. You decided, this was so great, I'm going to get a hold of some of these clothes and I'm going to send them out and have them tested myself. which, you know, I mean, what did you discover about what that would mean for you? I mean,
Yeah, so a lot of people do ask me, I think my uniform is toxic, or like, I think my clothing is toxic. Like, where do I get it tested? And I'm like, you don't get it tested because I got 5 items tested for a very, very limited number. I got the budget plan of hazardous chemicals and it cost me $10,000.
oh my God.
And most places, most commercial labs will not, especially if they're doing this for the fashion industry. The fashion industry is their clients. So they don't work with private citizens,
Mm,
right? Like they just want to keep, they want to keep their clients happy. All the tests, even if they fail, they're under a non-disclosure agreement. Nobody will ever know.
yeah, that's really quite amazing. Yeah, I want to talk about what we can do. There's what we can do as a consumer, excuse me, and then what governments should be doing. And I'm really interested in all these things. Can you talk about what we can actually do ourselves to try and get around this problem of chemicals in our clothing?
Yeah, there are some things that people can do to reduce their exposure and their family's exposure to some of these hazardous chemicals. No, not one of these things by themselves will work, but if you combine them, I think you can really reduce your exposure and
Mhm,
improve your health. So,
mhm,
going for natural fibers whenever possible. Um, Avoiding performance fabrics, so anything that's wrinkle free, stain resistant, water resistant, easy care, anti odor, all of these different things, usually achieved with hazardous chemical finishes. Um, Making sure to buy from real brands that care about their reputation. We have a lot of resources on ecocult.com, listing brands that have strong chemical management programs, even brands that are very, very affordable and you can find at your local mall. There are some that have strong chemical management programs.
mhm.
Um, Avoiding ultra fast fashion brands. So the Sheins, any brand you've never heard of that has a gibberish name on social media, those are quite dangerous. Washing your clothing before you wear it in unscented detergent and not using scented laundry products like dryer sheets or fabric softener. Avoiding dry cleaning whenever possible as well. Yeah, I mean those things taken together can really do a lot to protect you and your health.
Yeah. And then governments, you've talked about tariffs on and taxes, and can you talk about some of those things that government should be doing, which I'm really interested in from having read your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned this, but like the CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, it needs more funding. It needs more power to test and issue recalls specifically for the topic of hazardous chemicals in clothing. They need to legislate more hazardous chemicals, and for adult clothing as well as children's clothing. Um, the de minimis standard, which I mentioned, is the standard that says that anything under $800 that comes into the country is not tariff. That is encouraging and privileging ultra fast, ultra cheap, unethical, unsustainable brands that are toxic. It needs to be taken down to a more reasonable level so that the customs and border control can also do their job. And that also brands that are higher quality are not punished for doing the right thing, in bringing stuff into the country.
Mhm. Right. And then, ban the presence of endocrine disruptors.
Absolutely, completely.
And
We also, I also would say that we need mandatory full ingredient labels on fashion.
ingredient
So
label. So you
if
look
you
at your
look at
label, right? And you
Yeah,
say,
if you look at your label, like it just says polyester or cotton,
no,
but anything under 5%, they don't have to label.
no, they should. They should be saying cadmium, chromium, phthalates, BPOs, APOs. I mean, then
Yeah,
people would start looking very closely at that. And
yeah,
and that would be a huge, huge difference. And then you also say go after greenwashing was another thing.
yeah.
I just wanted to say we're getting toward the end here, and we're big. Earth Day is a big supporter of the Fashion Act, as are you. And can we talk about just briefly? The Fashion Act is called the Fashion Sustainability and Social Accountability Act, which is now sitting, it's about to go into the New York State session, January to June in Albany, in the Assembly and in the Senate, and hopefully this year it will be voted on. And I think it's, in relation to what I just read in your book, it seems ever more and more important to happen. What can you say about the Fashion Act? Do you think that's going to be very helpful?
Yeah, especially on this topic, because any brand that doesn't know who is dyeing their fashion, which is one of the things that the Fashion Act would ask for, is saying, like, you need to know your suppliers. Any brand that doesn't know who is doing the dyeing and finishing of its fabric is setting itself up to have toxic clothing, because the industry incentivizes cheap off-brand chemicals from the guy down the street, which can be contaminated, sloppy dyeing, cheap dyeing, cheap finishing. So if brands knew their suppliers and had a relationship with them where they're collecting data on their environmental impact, that would make all the difference.
All the difference in the world. Earth Day's theme this year, we have a theme each year. This year it's planet versus plastics. And one of the things we're looking at a lot in fashion are the microfibers that get washed into our oceans and that are now coursing, as you mentioned, through our veins and everything. And of course, there's two sides to it. One is the microfiber itself and what damage that's doing in the ocean, but it's also the toxic chemicals that are designed not to be washed off and that get in there. So again, this book is so important in that respect, because you're talking about, what are we talking about when we send those chemicals into the ocean? So it's for the entire, it's for nature.
Absolutely.
I just want to close by saying that Earth Day doesn't sell things. We don't sell things at Earth Day. I want to recommend, the holidays are coming up. I want to recommend this fantastic book. It's actually amazing. I'm such a slow reader, and I went right through it. I think other people have said that, and it's so important, Alden. I really take my hat off to you, because I think it's important to have in one place what's actually going on. And here you really outline everything that we need to know. I mean, anyone who has any questions about chemicals in our clothes, or about what government's doing, how it can affect babies, all of it's there. And the scientists have been working on it, and you really have highlighted their work, which is so great. Anyway, so thank you so much. I hope that we can collaborate in some way in the future. I hope to run into you in person, Alden.
Yeah.
Great having you. Thank you so much for being here. And I guess lastly, thank you to all of our Earth Day viewers who have been with us today.
Thank you so much, Shelley. This has been such a pleasure. And thank you for all your support of the book.
Okay. Thank you. You're welcome.